Have you ever met a stranger who made your skin crawl? In this video, we share true stories of creepy encounters with people whose actions left others feeling scared and uneasy. But first, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. I was walking back home along the beachfront after being out with the girls at about 11 p.m. I think I was about 17 at the time. It was 35 degrees in the middle of August, absolutely boiling. So I was just wearing denim shorts and a barely there top. No part of me felt anxious or worried. I lived in a small, safe country with barely any reported crime. This was about 2008, 2009, so social media wasn't prolific either. I turn into one of the narrow roads away from the beachfront, and it's just pitch black minus some faraway lights from street lamps. I could see the silhouette of a man in the distance getting out of a car and approaching me. I did feel a little nervous, but about 5 seconds later, I could clearly see that it was a police car with the blue lights, so felt instantly relieved. He approaches me and asks me if I saw two men running down the street. I tell him sorry, didn't see anything. He looks around, visibly concerned, tells me the two men were accused of sexual assault and that he couldn't possibly allow me to walk home by myself. He then gestures for me to get in his car so he can take me home. At this point, I'm just thanking my guardian angel for sending this hero my way to protect me. It was definitely a police car. He had the badge. He wore the uniform. All good. I feel super safe. He asks my name, makes some small talk, and pretty soon I've revealed that my dad is away, I don't have a brother, and I don't have a boyfriend. People don't ask these questions in an obviously creepy way. It's never, hey little girl, where's your daddy? It's more like, I can't believe you're walking home alone. Why doesn't your dad pick you up, or your brother? Oh, I see, no boyfriend either? Then it's the, you must have a lot of boys after you. Oh, you're only 17? You seem very mature for your age. Then comes the, you're gonna break so many hearts and you will turn into a beautiful woman. At this point, I'm not so comfortable anymore, so I ask him to drop me off a couple streets away from my house. He stops the car and just turns his body towards me. Tells me, doesn't ask, tells me to give him my number because he wants to message me on weekends and make sure I'm not walking home alone again. I give him my number without hesitation because I'd much rather block him afterwards than risk a confrontation at this point. He's nonchalantly touching my thigh as he speaks. My face, moving my hair behind my ear, not a lingering touch, but still. The thing is, no part of me thought he'd rape me or go any further. I had no doubt in my mind that he was a policeman. I had no doubt in my mind that this wasn't legally questionable. I just felt like some men, like younger girls, you're wearing skimpy clothes, you're being nice to him, he probably thinks you're interested. It's a bit creepy and I want to go home, but I'm not in danger. I'm just uncomfortable. And then it took a weird turn. He asks me if I've ever held a gun. I obviously hadn't ever seen one in real life and hadn't ever known anyone who had a gun. He then takes his gun out and tells me to hold it. I didn't think he was gonna shoot me, like not for a second, but I suddenly saw a gun for the first time in a confined space and I felt terrified. I had this intrusive thought that it would go off by accident and I could just imagine blood splatters all over the car windows. I ask him to please put it away. He insists that I hold it. This back and forth goes on for a few seconds and I'm like, fuck it. I take the gun and just hold it. My heart is beating out of my chest and he's looking at me, touching my hair and moving it out of my face. He's not saying anything, just looking at me. I decide to play his game and just do whatever as long as it gets me out of his car. So I tell him to hold the gun because I think he'd look really cool with it. Immediately, he takes that gun, holds it, runs it down my thigh. I tell him I like how it feels. Internally vomiting, but I keep a straight face. The whole time I feel like this is on me. Somewhere along this drive, I fucked up. I said something wrong and now here we are. I tell him it's almost midnight and I have a curfew. My mom will get mad, so I have to go home. I try to open the car door, but it's locked. In a very jokey way, he's like, "No, I don't want to let you go. I've only just found you. Me, I know my mom sucks, blah blah, but I have to go or else I'll be grounded and I won't be allowed to go anywhere for a month." He leans in, I do the shy little face turn. He puts his hand on my face and just gives me a long, lingering kiss on the cheek, kisses my hand a few times. The whole time he's breathing so heavy. I'm keeping the shy smile on. He unlocks the car, tells me he'll see me tomorrow, and I'm like, yes, of course. I get out of his car, turn the corner, and run. I don't know if he saw. He texted me pretty much straight away, I won't stop thinking about you until I see you again. I block, delete, never told my mom, never thought to report him, just had this heavy feeling of guilt in my chest, like if anyone found out, they'd judge me. Took a good 2 to 3 years to look back at that and realize how stupid I was to have felt guilty. I changed my phone by that time, but if I had his number, would have reported him to every authority imaginable. I was pregnant with my first child in 2001. Right before my due date, I was obviously really pregnant. I was shopping in Walmart, and I started to notice this woman on every aisle I went on. I would guess she was in her mid-30s. When I went to the baby section to look at clothes, she started asking me questions. At first, they were common, like about the gender. Then the question started getting strange. Was I married? Did we have a house or an apartment? She commented on my accent and was curious if we had anyone in the area. I am from Michigan and was stationed in Florida, visiting for the birth. Just kind of odd. I was young, 20, but I was married and my husband and I were both active duty, living off base in a rental house. I just told her yes, we were excited and to have a good rest of her day. She then started actually following me, telling me her husband was outside the store and they could help me take my groceries to my house. That's when I got really nervous. I told her I was fine, thanks, that my husband was home and could help me. She then told me they had a big truck and that she would buy me a large baby item. I politely declined and she was so insistent, becoming aggressive. She then offered to buy my husband a grill since we didn't need any baby things. I was getting panicky at this point because I knew this lady was not right. I went to check out, so did she. She got out before me and I watched her race walk out of the store, and sure enough, she and her husband were pulled along the curb at the front near the pop machines. They were in a beat up old yellow box truck. Husband rolls down the window and says, "We'd be happy to help you with that." I again declined and went to my car, loaded up and watched for a minute. They didn't move, just watched me. As soon as I pulled out, they did too. I hauled ass out of there and they were only behind me for a minute or two. I still drove around crying for about 30 minutes making sure they were gone before I had to pee and needed to go home. I'm now 44 and that is the first and one of just a few times that I have felt that level of fear in my life. When I was about 14, my longtime childhood friend and I, both having super strict parents, used to sneak out in the middle of the night during our summer break just to hang out, walk around town, and generally sneak around feeling daring. One night, I went and stood outside her house at the usual time, but she didn't show. I eventually gave up and went to walk back home. About halfway back, a car came down the street towards me. I was on the same side of the road and some instinct told me to cross to the other side. Just as I decided to do so, the car started slowing down. So I crossed and it sped up again. As it passed me, the driver turned his face towards me and gave me a penetrating stare that chilled me. As the street was otherwise completely silent and deserted, I could easily hear this car reach the end of the road, then turn and head back my way. Thinking fast, I waited until he'd almost reached me before running back across to the other side of the road. This time, the look he gave me was unmistakably angry. He sped up again, and as I was just passing a smaller side road, I ran down there as fast as I could. I knew there was an alleyway at the other end that I could get home through, and he couldn't drive down that way. Again, I heard car reach the other end of the road and turn round again. As the sound of the engine approached, I dived behind a parked car. He came down my side road, driving very, very slowly. Peeking out, I caught a glimpse of the driver looking left and right as his car crept along the road. He was clearly looking for me. As soon as the car had turned a corner out of sight, I ran up a nearby gravel driveway that turned out to have a couple of lockup garages at the other end. By some amazing stroke of luck, I found one was unlocked. I slipped inside and pulled the door to, crawled under a tarpaulin in a dark corner and just waited. A few minutes later, I heard a car door slam. Then I heard one of the most terrifying sounds I'd ever heard. Footsteps on gravel. They came to my end of the driveway and just stood there for a while. I don't even know how he knew I was there, as he wouldn't have been able to see me go up there in his rearview mirror, unlike he presumably had with the side road, but apparently he did. Eventually, he seemed to give up, and I heard the footsteps receding back down the drive. Then the car door slam and the engine rev up. I have no clue how long I stayed there under that tarp in the pitch dark with my legs cramping up, but it felt like forever. It was morning by the time I got home. This was almost 30 years ago, but I can still feel those chills. One day I was with my cousins, and we were riding our bikes around this abandoned track field with a bunch of trees. An hour or so passed, and this middle-aged man enters through the gate. He had an orange bag on, a blue shirt, and some jeans on. He also had a black cap on. He sits down on a log and watches us the whole time. Me and my cousins were obviously creeped out and just ignored him. He seemed to be eating his food or whatever, so we just thought he was minding his business, and we were just being paranoid. After like 3 hours, we were all pretty thirsty and tired. There was a store right around the corner where we could have gotten some snacks and drinks, so we decided to leave. It was getting late anyways. Mind you, the man was still there just watching us. While leaving, I ran over a rock and my bike leaped forward, almost knocking me off my bike. I laughed it off and we went on. Once we reached the store, I reached inside my pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. I asked my cousins if they had it. They said no. So I frantically told my cousin to go run back and check if I had dropped it. And he did. He comes back after 5 minutes and there was no sign of my phone. I start freaking out and I run back to the track field to look for it myself with my bike. I searched the grass, the trees, everything, but I still couldn't find my phone. Then I started realizing something. The man was still there, watching me frantically looking for my phone. He just sat there and stared at me. Both my cousins come back from the store and find me still looking for my phone. My older cousin finally pulled out her phone and tries to track mine's down. Thankfully, I always had my location on. The GPS on her phone showed that my phone wasn't far away from me and it was where I was at. I was about to declare victory until my cousin whispered in my ear, "What if that guy has it?" The idea wasn't completely absurd. He was actually sitting in the area where my phone claimed to be according to the GPS. But I just brushed it off and told her that wasn't going to accuse a random stranger of stealing my phone. She calls me stupid and we just kept searching. As I was still searching, my bigger cousin kept a close eye on the guy, which he was still chilling over there. A few moments later, he starts walking away. My cousin looks down on her phone up at the guy right when he started moving. My phone on her GPS started moving as well in the same direction he was moving, so my cousin taped my shoulder and showed me what was happening. I started to freak out. My heart dropped. I didn't have idea how to deal with the situation. My cousin ended up telling me that we had to confront him or I would never have my phone back and we cannot let him leave with it because it was my phone after all, so I did just that. I slowly ran up to him and politely approached the man. "Excuse me, sir. Have you seen a pink phone anywhere?" He slowly turned around and just looked me up and down with this sinister, mocking, smirking look on his face. He denies that he had ever seen a phone and started walking away. The GPS is literally moving once he started walking away again. At this point, I was pissed. Not the fact that he took my phone, but the fact that he lied to my face. He looked at me dead in the eyes and told me that he hadn't seen my phone. I gave him a chance to come clean. I could have been aggressive, but I wasn't. I was a polite and patient, even though HE was the one with my phone. At this point, I was pissed, so I screamed, "Hey, stop!" He stops in his tracks, but slowly puts his hand in his pocket. I thought fast and assumed that he was going to pull out a weapon, so I stepped back. To my surprise, he pulls out my phone and hands it to me then, nervously laughing and apologizing. "You're lucky we didn't call the police." My cousin says the word police clearly scared him and he starts apologizing, then he flees. My cousin was fuming and so was I. I started cursing at him and yelling, and I was just overwhelmed about the situation. What would you have done in this situation? It was a sunny Sunday. We slept until like 8 a.m., opened the front door, and let the dogs out to sniff around the garden and pee. I cooked coffee in the kitchen, still in my pajamas, and chatted with my husband. Right when I was pouring the hot water over the coffee powder in the French press, we heard our eldest dog bark like crazy. Then we heard the garden gate. It's made of metal, so quite loud if closed with force. And the barking got even crazier. I still remember how both husband and I froze, looking at each other before we both rushed out of the front door. I was first and ran into a guy who was about to walk further into the garden and stopped when I came out, turning to me. I connected the dots and realized he had planned to go after our dog, who was nowhere to be seen and who obviously had fled into the garden. The guy was dressed into a wife-beater shirt that he had already sweated through, tattoos all over. He had a sledgehammer in one hand, a knife in the other hand. As soon as my eyes fell on the knife, my brain went empty and all I could think of was to get this dude off our property. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking and basically managed to talk this guy out of our home. I can no longer remember what I said or what I thought, but it worked. He told me he had personal issues and that his life was in shambles. Some sad story about his aunt. As soon as he was out of the garden gate and went his way, my husband called the cops. He tried to flee, but one of their dogs caught him. We learned later that he was full on drugs. Later, we discovered that he had already hit our dog at least once with the sledgehammer. That's why our sweet, protective baby fled into the garden. The vet said that if the guy had hit one of our smaller dogs that day, they'd have been dead. But our eldest dog had like 80 pounds and was lucky that he was only hit between ribcage and hip. So fleshy area. My husband later told me that he had been terrified of me getting killed. Because I was so close, he saw no safe way to intervene and get me out of the way without the dude losing it completely. Throughout that day, I was in a strange disbelief, as if I narrated a story. The next day, I snapped. I suddenly realized how freaking dangerous the whole incident had been and couldn't stop crying. Also, it took me years to again feel safe at home, and to this day, I have a strange feeling when opening the front door for the dogs. 3 or 4 days ago, my wife and I were sound asleep in our bedroom. Around 2:45 a.m., our German Shepherd Duke started barking viciously. We've never heard him bark like this before, so we assumed something was amiss. I got up to check and see if something was up and ended up spilling a water on my nightstand. It took me 2 to 3 minutes to clean up the water, and I figured maybe Duke was simply barking at the rain. I went back to sleep, and a few minutes later, Duke starts again with the vicious bark. My wife starts freaking out and turns our lamp on. We sat in bed for a second, spooked. And then we heard someone trying our front door. We heard the screen door clicking into place after being shut. The front door was locked, so he had no way to get in. At this point, I'm freaked out, and so is my wife. From our bedroom, we can see a window in our kitchen that leads out front. My wife starts staring at it intensely and tells me she can see a shadow moving back and forth. She said it was a dark silhouette walking up and down our front sidewalk. At this point, I'm getting scared, and when I get scared, I get angry. I get up and turn on our kitchen light in hopes of spooking the stranger outside. You would think he would leave with our dog barking and lights turning on. At this point, I didn't know what to do and made a stupid mistake. I went to my garage and opened the garage door. I then realized I wasn't wearing shoes and went back to my living room to put them on. I wanted to go outside, find the disturbance, and deal with it. Duke was with me the whole time, and when he suddenly turned and started running toward the door that connects to the garage, I knew I had messed up. I turned and looked, and this dude was just standing in my kitchen with mud on his face. Dude smelled like shit. He was wearing relatively decent clothes and didn't appear homeless. I live in the heart of a really nice part of town. As I started approaching him, it looked like he was trying to take his jacket and shoes off. It was very bizarre. I yelled at him, "Get the fuck out of my house," while Duke was jumping, growling, and barking at the guy. He took a step back and said something incomprehensible. I yelled, "It's 3 in the morning, get the fuck out of my house," and I shoved him. He sort of stumbled and made his way out of the house, into the garage, and then left. I shut the garage door and called the cops. The cops came and said there were a couple of meth heads in the area known to do things like this, except they didn't fit the description of the guy I described. I haven't been able to sleep for a few days now. I don't know what this guy was after. Best case scenario, he was incredibly fucked up and had no idea what he was doing. Maybe he thought it was his house, since he started taking his shoes and jacket off. From the door leading from the garage and into the house, there's a glass. Where I was standing, he couldn't see me, but he could see my wife. Is it possible he saw her alone and thought maybe she was by herself and come in? The guy wasn't aggressive toward me, but he was also bigger than me, 6 and 2 feet, 210 pounds. Before y'all say it, I know I shouldn't have opened the garage. He obviously took it as an open invitation, and I've felt guilt about it since the time it happened. I figured barking dogs, lights on, garage opening, normal burglar would just scram. My wife and I are incredibly lucky he wasn't armed or couldn't do anything violent toward us. Background: I used to work in the UK for a large international company. We did a lot of R&D in Germany, and I used to be seconded to various technical projects and loaned to departments in Germany. We also had the main technical training facility on the same facility in Germany. I'd attended many times in the 90s, made lots of good friends there, one of whom was one of several staff interpreters. Usually for training, we'd send 2 approximately 3 techs from the UK, so people had a training buddy. Unlike my UK colleagues, I was more often in Germany on projects, but kept an eye on the school schedule, in case UK or other international colleagues might be coming, and I could introduce them to people and show them around. In 2001, I was out there on some project, alone. The school was between semesters and mostly closed, so I was surprised when I bumped into an interpreter, Buddy. He told me they were running some special basic intro classes for a single student from Switzerland. John, real name. John had been out there for some weeks alone, and my buddy asked if I had time to meet him, help him out a bit. Of course, no problem, and this is how I came to meet John. He was staying in my hotel, so we basically spent breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, some late nights drinking beer, and the week following. John was a lovely guy, early 50s. He'd come from an unrelated field, and I was so impressed at him taking such a tangential career direction at his age. I was early 30s, but with a lot more experience than my age implied. But John had such a mountain to learn, he really didn't know the half of it. And I tried to help as much as possible and let him fire questions at me as much as we had time to share. T was an atypical few weeks for me, but I really admired John. He was keen, driven, and enthusiastic. And I still think of this great example today. So I headed back to the UK for a few weeks and never managed to be back in Germany when John was there. But my colleagues kept me updated about John. Some months passed before I was back in Germany. I asked after John, and no one there had news. A few trips, months later, I bumped into the Swiss service manager. I didn't know him well, but we knew each other by reputation, face. I asked him about John, and his reaction was odd, but kind of coy or cagey. And initially he pretended to not know who I was asking about. I pushed my points, and he conceded. John left conversation over. I was taken a bit by surprise, and his attitude was weird. But the more I thought about it later, the more I was sad and worried for John. Anyway, some more trips, months go by. I'm back in Germany. I bump into a different Swiss college. We'd hung out many times before, but I'd not seen him in the last year, so naturally I asked him about John. He looked startled. We had several other colleagues there, and he kind of excused himself and indicated later. So, we're not supposed to talk about it, so don't. I explained John was my buddy, and why is everyone I asked being weird about this simple question? And then he tells me, okay, I'll tell you, John, he's in jail. What? A couple walking their dog in the forest, see a car, boot open, guy dumping rubbish in a black bin bag. They challenge him. He is startled, jumps in car, drives off in a hurry. They catch his number plate and go to gather up the rubbish. The bag moves. 15-year-old girl inside, still alive. Obviously number plate was traced. It was John. The young girl was a school friend of John's teenage daughter. She survived. John went to prison. To this day, I simply do not understand what or how that could happen. John, what happened, man? A few times over the years, I see some horrific story in the news, and it reminds me once again of John and the poor girl and what absolute devastation was done to her, her family, and John's daughter and family too. I just can't reconcile it. Did John really do that? What happened to him? He was such a lovely guy when I knew him. I still wonder about it. Could there have been a miscarriage of justice? I hope the poor girl is okay today, if such a thing is possible, really. And finally, John, whatever happened to you, I'm sorry.